This week marks 2 years since the tragic events at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. Our community rocked to its core after losing 17 innocent lives. Many loved ones of the victims have become advocates for change, including our guest here on Impact, Fred Guttenberg, joining me here to discuss everything he's doing to keep kids safe in schools and the orange ribbons for Jamie. Fred Guttenberg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
2 years. I can't even imagine, and all I could ask at this point is, how are you and the family doing?
You know, depends on the day that you ask me that question. This week has been hard. While 2 years have passed, the seconds and minutes of that day live on in our heads as if it was yesterday. But there's a lot of extra attention to it this week that we can't ignore. You know, we miss our child. We are upset at everything that led to that day. And in moments like this week, where we have to go through the remembrance and the commemoration, you can't ignore the violence, you can't ignore the failure, you can't ignore how something like this was so preventable, and yet it happened.
We're going to talk about all of that, but the human aspect of this, you were telling me that you, on February 14th, took 2 kids to school.
Yeah. It was that morning plays in my head every second of every day. Because it was the most typical normal morning in my house, with the exception of the fact that it was the start of what was my wife's favorite holiday, Valentine's Day. And, you know, I actually had a plan for that night with the whole family. My daughter was 14, my son is 16, and I wanted to bring them into the romance of Valentine's Day. And we were going to actually, I had taken my wedding video, which had always been on VHS, so we hadn't watched it with the kids because we don't have VHS equipment in the house anymore. I actually converted it to a DVD, and we were going to watch it that night. Like I said, it was, other than that, a normal morning. My kids were running late. My dogs needed to be taken care of. My wife and I needed to get out the door. And what I remember about that morning, and these words live in my head, is just simply saying, you got to go, you got to go, you got to get to school. I was so busy rushing them out the door to get to school, the place where my daughter died, that my last words were not, I love you. And I'll never, ever forget it.
I'm sure she knew that.
She did, but it's something that let me just say it this way. I tell every parent now, every chance you get, or tell anyone who loves somebody else, tell them you love them every second you get, and look them in the eye as if it could be the last time you will ever say it, because it could be.
You have become, as a result, there are many ways to cope with the incredible pain that you have endured. And one of those avenues that you have used to cope with this pain is to become a gun and safety advocate. How did you transform your life into that?
The day after Jamie was killed, we had the vigil in Parkland. I decided I wanted to go to the vigil, and I went with some friends and family. My wife and son and other family members stayed back at the house. And when I got there, the Parkland mayor asked me if I wanted to say some words. And it wasn't something I could have prepared for, but I had a lot going on in my heart and my head, and I just said yes. And I went up there, and I looked out into this crowd. There were thousands of people at this vigil. And that's, after the first 24 hours of this trauma, that's where it really settled in my head. We're victims of gun violence. I mean, that's what just tore my community apart, tore my family apart. And I went home that night and said to my wife and my family, I'm going to break that effing lobby. That was the night where I knew something in me changed. And I haven't been able to stop dealing with what I see as the ultimate issue, and it's the weak gun laws in this country that allow those who want to kill to have easy access to the weapons and the ammunition to do so. And so yes, since that night I have been on a mission to deal with the issue of guns and gun violence. Not the Second Amendment, not trying to take away anybody's Second Amendment right. That's not what gun safety is. But to deal with the reality that there are people who are violent, who we can predict want to do harm to others, who have easy access, and we need to remove that.
You have been successful in the state of Florida. Just a few weeks after that, gun legislation was passed.
It was, and I'm glad you asked about Florida, because it's the example I use of what good gun safety legislation can start to look like. Because if you ask any gun owner in this state, any Second Amendment believer in this state, what part of that law has had any impact on them? The answer is none of it. Any legal lawful gun owner has not felt any impact from that law. However, it has worked to save a lot of lives. The other thing that happened in Florida that really gets to the fact that the citizens of Florida want to do more. Nikki Fried. Nikki Fried ran a statewide campaign on the issue of gun safety, and she was the only candidate to do so. The other candidates who ran statewide campaigns did not run hard on gun safety the way she did, and she ran against a candidate who had the complete opposite view of her, and she won. She is proof that the citizens of Florida, the voters of Florida, want to do more on this issue. I'm very thankful to Majority Leader Senator Galvano for who's continuing to try and do more on this issue. Sadly, members of the House and the governor's office, they're not joining him in that effort.
I want to talk about an incident because last week we were both in Washington, D.C. I was covering the State of the Union address for President Trump. There was an unfortunate incident where you were escorted out of the chamber. You were a guest there. And when the president talked about the Second Amendment, which you just referred to, you had a reaction. You said that you let your emotions get the best of you. What happened?
It started, my emotions about that speech were starting before that comment. Earlier in that speech, not long before the Second Amendment comment, he talked about violence. And he talked about violence as if it's only at the hands of illegals. You know, you saw him do it, and how we need to deal with it by building the wall and doing all these really vile, disgusting things. So I was already upset, because never once did he talk about the fact that my daughter was killed by an American teenage male. A little later in the speech, he got to the part about the Second Amendment. He didn't say, I'm going to protect our children from gun violence. I'm going to protect our parents from gun violence. I'm going to protect our siblings from gun violence. He said, I'm going to protect all of your Second Amendment rights that are under attack all over this country. And that was a lie. Nowhere in this country is the Second Amendment under attack. However, our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are under attack because of the risk of gun violence.
What did you say?
I said 9 words. What about victims of gun violence like my daughter? That was it. And for that, I got escorted out. I got detained. Thankfully, due to our wonderful Congressman, Ted Deutsch, and Speaker Pelosi, they put a quick end to that as soon as the speech was over. But I will tell you, as hard a night as that was, and as upset as I was at myself for letting my emotions get the best of me, I could not have been more inspired the next day. This country rallied. And it wasn't for me, but it was around this issue. You saw people around this issue talking about gun violence as an important factor, and they would not have been doing so if not for what happened in the State of the Union. And what happened the next day just became another example of why I am so inspired and optimistic that we're going to succeed.
There was also a meeting in the White House with some of the Parkland parents with the president. You were not invited to that meeting? Yeah.
So what happened with that, and I didn't need to be at that meeting. It wasn't a meeting for me. It was with the group Stand with Parkland. And they were there to launch a school safety website, and they're doing tremendous work. What happened, though, is that was a meeting that was kept under the radar, and I didn't know about it, which, again, I didn't need to. Except for the way I found out about it that morning. I started getting calls from reporters at 6:30 in the morning saying the White House schedule is showing a private meeting with Parkland families. Not knowing anything about it, I put out a tweet showing the White House's schedule and letting people know I wasn't invited. And so, listen, in hindsight, And the White House has since acknowledged the way they put out that schedule was incorrect. It should have said exactly who they were meeting with, but it didn't.
And something good came out of that meeting, which was that website?
That's correct. That so many of those families, I mean, you know, the members of Stand With Parkland and Max Schachter, who has worked tirelessly on this, you know, they've worked really hard to do good work, and that's going to help with the issues around school safety. I was really angry at the White House for the way they handled their scheduling, because being that this is the 2-year mark, that to me looked like an effort to take advantage, but I'm really proud of those families.
I want to talk about Orange Ribbons for Jamie, and you have a big event coming up.
We do.
Tell us about that.
So it's our comedy show, and with 3 nationally known comedians. It's next Wednesday, February 19th at the Parker Playhouse. It's a big deal because, and again, I get to how I'm just inspired by people. One of these nationally known comedians, Jessica Curson, reached out to me 6 months ago. And people know her from Late Night and Howard Stern. And she just wanted to say thank you for the work that I'm doing, you know. And I ended up going to see her at one of her shows in New York. And she said that night, I want to do a fundraiser for you. From that, she ended up getting Jim Brewer and Alonzo Bowden.
Wow.
Alonzo Bowden actually won NBC's Last Comic Standing. Jim Brewer, everyone knows from Howard Stern and Late Night. And the 3 of them are using their time to come to our community after this 2-year mark to actually help us laugh. And to also help my foundation raise money for a great cause, because the work that we do to honor Jamie's memory is only possible with events like this.
Absolutely.
The new scholarship that we just started, actually that we just completed the first phase of, is only possible with events like this. And we are getting ready in the first week of March to announce our scholarship winners. We're giving out 14 scholarships. The reason we're doing 14, Jamie was 14. And we're giving out over $50,000 in scholarships.
That's amazing.
So it's only possible with these fundraising events.
Well, I got to say, this is a big one, Comedy Night.
It's a big
and it's coming
deal.
up February 19th?
It is. And you can go right to our website, Orange Ribbons for Jamie, ORANGE, RIBBONS, JAIME is how we spelled her name, .org. And there's a link to Ticketmaster right on the website.
Okay, that's wonderful. Fred Guttenberg.
Thank you so much for having me.
God bless you and your family.
Appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Next year on NBC6 Impact, our political analyst Carlos Corbello is here to break down the race for the White House. Next.